What's going on, guys? I'm CFB Kings, and welcome back to another episode of the CFBKings Show. Really appreciate you tuning in today. It's December 10th, 2024. The first ever 12-team college football playoff bracket is officially set, and we'll be breaking down everything from championship weekend today. The games from over the weekend were phenomenal, at least in the Power 4, and gave us a really interesting Sunday in terms of the selection show and everything. We'll get into the CFP field shortly, but before we do, I wanted to highlight some of the conference championship games and the results in those that helped shape the bracket. At the SEC championship game in Atlanta, number 5 Georgia defeated number 2 Texas 22-19 in overtime. This game was really slow moving for a while, but finally got going with some major plays in the third and fourth quarters, and the Dogs made one more play in overtime to get the win. So Georgia wins the SEC championship, but they also may have received a big loss in terms of the injury that starting quarterback Carson Beck suffered right at the end of the first half. The first reports were that he injured his UCL and his elbow. There's no timetable for his return, and that he's most likely going to miss their playoff game against the winner of Indiana and Notre Dame. Gunnar Stockton really played well for the Dogs on Saturday, though. He had one bad pass that was intercepted and almost cost them the game late, but he was just trying to throw the ball out of bounds and simply didn't get it far enough. So he finished 12 of 16, that's 75% for 71 yards after being put on the spot to come in against number 2 Texas in the SEC championship game. With a few weeks to prepare, Stockton could really give them a solid option if Beck ends up not being able to go, but having a quarterback make his first career start in a college football playoff game isn't exactly ideal, of course. Getting back to the game itself, Texas had several chances to win this one and just didn't take advantage of them. They missed 2 field goals, they threw an interception at the Georgia 33, there were a couple missed passes that could have been game changers, and the Dogs just had their number again. Texas outgained Georgia 389 to 277, 112 more total yards, and lost the game. Ewers was solid at quarterback, but certainly didn't have his best game. He was 27 of 46 for 358 yards, a touchdown, and 2 interceptions. As usual, there was a lot of commotion regarding having Arch Manning on the bench for all but 1 or 2 plays in the game, and what they'll do moving forward to potentially work him into the game plan more. I think he only had 1 run for 5 yards or something like that was all his contribution was in the SEC championship game, but especially with his running ability moving forward, that definitely is something that they could work in against Clemson, and it'll be very interesting to see how they manage that against the Tigers in the first round. The Longhorns come up just short of conquering the conference in their first season in it. Georgia wins their 3rd SEC championship under Kirby Smart and earned the first round bye in the college football playoff. In the ACC championship game, number 17 Clemson took down number 8 SMU on a walk-off 56-yard field goal as time expired by Nolan Hooser. This was the first time in college football history that a team won a conference championship game on a walk-off field goal of over 50 yards, and it was an electric finish in Charlotte. Clemson jumped out to a really quick lead. Defensive end TJ Parker sacked Kevin Jennings on the second play of the game. He stripped the ball and recovered it as well. And then Cade Klubnik threw a 35-yard touchdown on their second offensive play. They forced a punt and then went right down and scored again. And it was 14-0 just over 4 minutes into the game. SMU battled back for a while, but then going into the fourth quarter, it was 31-14 Clemson. SMU trailed by 17 points. But responded with 17 unanswered to tie it up at 31, including their touchdown with 16 seconds left. After that touchdown, everything looked like it was going to overtime. McDonough and McElroy were talking about heading to overtime on the broadcast, and Clemson, of course, then had the 40-yard kickoff return by Adam Randall. They threw one pass to Antonio Williams to get into field goal range, and then Nolan Hooser kicked a 56-yard bomb to win it. Cade Klubnik was great for the Tigers in this game. He had 283 total yards and 4 touchdowns. Bryant Wesco was a big part of those stats. He had 8 receptions for 143 yards. That's almost 18 yards per catch, and 2 receiving touchdowns. TJ Parker was a monster. Like I mentioned before, he had that forced fumble and fumble recovery on the second play of the game, and then added 3.5 tackles for loss throughout the rest of it. I want to bring up something that I said last week that was going to be one of the keys to this game, because this may have been one of the best reads that I've ever had on a game. This is a clip from last week's preview episode regarding how I thought SMU would have to play if they were going to win the game. One area where Clemson has a massive edge over SMU, and really the majority of the country, is in turnover margin. The Tigers are 5th in the FBS in turnover margin, and the Mustangs are 57th. Clemson's forced 23 turnovers and only given it up 9 times. SMU's forced 21 turnovers and given it up 19 times. I think this will be the key to the game. If the Tigers can continue attacking the ball on defense and protecting it on offense, if guys like TJ Parker, Peter Woods, Barrett Carter, and Sammy Brown can get to Kevin Jennings and maybe force a strip fumble or something, I think that can win them the game. And then in the secondary as well, if guys like Khalil Barnes, Avion Terrell, Ashton Hampton can make an interception or two like they have in, I believe, 4 consecutive games, if they can take a couple drives from that explosive SMU offense, I think the Tigers will have a good shot to win it. In addition to SMU having to be careful with the ball to win this game, they're going to have to play clean and not penalize themselves as well. There are 134 teams in the FBS. SMU is 130th in penalty yards this season. They've been penalized 101 times for a total of 962 yards. Clemson is 35th in penalties, 64 penalties for 602 yards. There's almost 100 spots separating them in this category. And there's probably going to be a good amount of Tigers fans there in Charlotte, so SMU is going to have to avoid false starts. They're going to have to avoid holding those aggressive defensive ends, stuff like that if they're going to win this game. All right, back here now on the recap episode. I specifically mentioned TJ Parker needing to get to the quarterback and Khalil Barnes potentially getting an interception. Parker had a strip sack and Barnes had an interception both in the first quarter of the game. Then the penalties stat, SMU came into Saturday 130th in penalties per game. Clemson was 35th. SMU had 6 penalties for 65 yards. Clemson had 0 penalties for 0 yards on Saturday night. Interestingly enough, that's the second time the Tigers have done that in the last 2 years. They put it up during the broadcast. Clemson had 1 0 penalty game in 1952, then went 71 years without doing it again, but then they had 0 penalties in a win over Notre Dame last season and 0 penalties in Charlotte against SMU. So they won the turnover battle by 2, which led to 7 very critical points at the beginning of the game, and then they won the penalty battle, which helped not cut short all those other scoring drives. The Tigers win their 8th ACC championship in the last 10 years, and they have now won a postseason game in 14 consecutive seasons. That's the longest streak in college football history. 14 straight years where they've either won an ACC title, a bowl game, a CFP game, or a national title, if not multiple of those in several seasons. Clemson gets the auto bid to the college football playoff where they will face Texas, and SMU stays alive as well as the 11th seed in the CFP rankings where they'll face Penn State, and we'll talk more about those in a bit. In the Big Ten championship game, number 1 Oregon defeated number 3 Penn State 45-37, and the Ducks have won the Big Ten title in their very first season in the conference. This game looked really nothing like I thought it would. I picked Oregon to win, but I did not think the victory would come in this style of game. The over-under in this game was 51.5 points. They had a combined 55 at halftime. I thought this would be a much lower scoring, more defensive-oriented game, but it finished with 82 total points and was really a shootout. Penn State put up 523 total yards in this game. The Penn State Nittany Lions, who came into the week ranked 21st in yards per game, put up 523 total yards on the number 1 team in the country. If someone told me that before the game, I would have thought they won by 21 plus points. They outgained the Ducks 523 to 469 and also had more first downs, 28 to 24, but lost the turnover margin by 2, and that's really where the game was decided. Penn State threw an interception that was returned all the way to the goal line and punched in by Oregon the next play for a touchdown. And they threw another pick on their final drive, a phenomenal catch by the Ducks defensive back that eventually sealed the game. Oregon improves to 13-0. They claim the number 1 seed in the college football playoff bracket and will await the winner of Tennessee and Ohio State. Penn State fell to the 6th seed, and they will face 11 seed SMU in a first-round home game. In the Big 12 Championship in Arlington, Texas, number 15 Arizona State clobbered number 16 Iowa State 45-19 to win the Big 12 in their first season in the conference. Coming into the year, back during the summer in August, Arizona State was picked number 16 in the Big 12 media preseason poll. If you're unfamiliar with the Big 12, there are 16 teams in it. They were picked dead last, 16th out of 16. The ESPN FPI gave them a 0.6% chance to win the Big 12 and just a 0.8% chance to make the playoff. And after a 3-9 season last year in the Pac-12, Kenny Dillingham has completely flipped Arizona State, and they're headed to the CFP at 11-2 and as champions of the Big 12. Cam Scatterby was an absolute monster as usual. He had 16 carries for 170 yards. That's 10.6 yards per carry, and then had 2 rushing touchdowns. He also had 2 receptions for 38 yards and a touchdown, so he touched the ball 18 times, accounted for 208 total yards, and 3 touchdowns. He even struck a Heisman pose in the end zone after one of those touchdowns, stating his case to head to New York, which I believe he should have. The Heisman finalists were announced last night, and he was not one of the 4, unfortunately. Iowa State had drives early on where it looked like they were in the game, but Arizona State came out in the second half and just put it away. It was tied 10-10, I think, early in the second quarter, and the Sun Devils went on a 35-0 run in between the second and third quarters that led to them being up 45-10 heading into the fourth before they called off the Dogs. Not only did they win the conference and punch their ticket to the playoff, but probably due to how dominant they were on Saturday, they are one of the top 4 seeds and get a first-round bye week where they will await the winner of Clemson and Texas. I've mentioned it a few times over the past couple weeks, but the turnaround for Arizona State has been unbelievable, and they have this slogan, Activate the Valley, and they've done exactly that. We'll see what they do in the playoff, but just getting this 11-win season, winning the conference in their first year in it, they have a young, exciting head coach, and ASU has a ton to build on as a program moving forward with this season. In the group of 5, in what ended up being really the only somewhat competitive game, number 10 Boise State defeated number 20 UNLV 21-7. The Broncos improved to 12-1. They win the Mountain West title yet again, and they locked in their spot in the playoff. Not only are they in the CFP, and not only did they get a first-round bye week, they actually ended up being the 3 seed, ahead of both the Big 12 and ACC champions. Ashton Jeanty put the team on his back again, 32 carries for 209 yards and a touchdown, 2 receptions for 14 yards as well, so 223 total yards against a ranked opponent, including that 75-yard rushing touchdown, which really ended up sealing the deal for Boise State. UNLV had opportunities to keep this game competitive, but I think the 20-degree weather in Boise really got to them. They missed a field goal. They had an 86-yard run down to the Boise State 5-yard line where they couldn't punch it in and ended up turning it over on downs. They turned it over on downs at the Boise State 21 towards the end of the game as well. And credit to the Broncos defense for bowing up and holding them out of the end zone in those scenarios, but UNLV just wasn't able to replicate much of what they did against the Broncos back in October. Ashton Jeanty will be in New York on Saturday for the Heisman Trophy ceremony, where he should be the winner of the 2024 Heisman Trophy. And then the Broncos are going to face the winner of SMU Penn State in their Fiesta Bowl college football playoff quarterfinal. The rest of the group of 5 was an absolute bloodbath, both in terms of how things unfolded on the field and in terms of my predictions for those games. I got 3 out of the 4 Power 4 champions right, and the only one I missed was Texas, who lost in overtime after missing 2 field goals in regulation. But I somehow managed to pull off an 0-5 record in the group of 5 games. Number 24 Army absolutely dominated Tulane 35-14 to win the AAC title. Jacksonville State, who lost to Western Kentucky 9 days ago, beat the Hilltoppers by 40, 52-12 to win the Conference USA title. Ohio destroyed Miami of Ohio 38-3 for the MAC championship, and Marshall steamrolled Louisiana 31-3 for the Sun Belt title. I was really hyped up for those games, and unfortunately all of them ended up being really one-sided blowouts, which wasn't much fun, but props to the winners of those games, especially Jacksonville State, who was in just their second year in the FBS. They were playing at the FCS level in 2022, and they have already secured their first conference title as an FBS program. Ohio's victory in the MAC championship was very notable as well. They captured their first conference title since 1968. The last time they won the MAC was 56 years ago, and there wasn't even a conference championship game then. So the Bobcats win their first ever conference championship game, and they did so in dominant fashion by 35 points. That was an enormous victory for Ohio's program because it's not like they've been bad lately. They hadn't won the conference in 56 years, but that wasn't because they weren't competitive. They had been to the MAC title game 5 times since 2006 and had lost 5 consecutive trips there before Saturday's victory. All right, let's get into the CFP rankings. The college football playoff field is officially set. We have the schools in the first ever 12-team playoff bracket, and we know who gets to host the first ever home playoff games. And after 15 weeks of all these teams battling this season, the playoff is here. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see the rankings and the bracket. If you're listening on podcast, though, we have 1 seed Oregon, 2 seed Georgia, 3 seed Boise State, and 4 seed Arizona State as the teams with the first round byes. And then 5 seed Texas, 6 seed Penn State, 7 seed Notre Dame, 8 seed Ohio State, 9 seed Tennessee, 10 seed Indiana, 11 seed SMU, and 12 seed Clemson as the 5th highest ranked conference champion. Of course, the biggest point of discussion on Sunday afternoon was the fact that the committee respected SMU making their conference championship game, didn't punish them for losing on a walk-off field goal in that game, and left 9-3 Alabama out. If you've listened to the show lately or followed the Twitter or Instagram pages, you might know that I believe that was the clear and right decision, and for the first time all year, I was really mostly in agreement with the committee. Something that ESPN's Reese Davis said on the Rankings Reveal show on Sunday right before the decision between SMU and Alabama was announced was that there wasn't a right answer for the committee in terms of their decision. He said something along the lines of, there's no right answer, they're going to be setting a controversial precedent either way, and he wasn't the only one saying that either. That was a very popular talking point Saturday night and Sunday morning, but I wholeheartedly disagree with that. There was a right answer and there was a wrong answer, and they made the right one in my opinion by putting SMU in. They preserved conference championship games, they didn't punish SMU for going 8-0 in ACC play and getting to Charlotte, and they didn't reward Alabama for finishing 5th in the SEC and sitting at home on conference championship Saturday. And the conversation around the value of strength of schedule and the fallout among Alabama and SEC fans regarding future scheduling and how they should just go cancel every difficult non-conference game made absolutely zero sense. First off, Alabama didn't lose a non-conference game. They lost 3 times in conference play. So the Alabama AD and all these fans saying, well, we're just going to go schedule super easy teams from here on out. Okay, because that's what you did this year by playing USF, Mercer, Western Kentucky, and 5-7 Wisconsin. So that made zero sense. Alabama was left out of the playoff because they lost to 6-6 Vanderbilt and got blown out by 6-6 Oklahoma. Yes, they had a tough strength of schedule and it was towards the top of everybody in the FBS, but that really loses a lot of its value if you lose a quarter of your games. If you play a tough strength of schedule but lose once every 4 times that you step on the field, that's probably not the best case for you to be a championship contender and have to win 4 games in a row against those caliber teams to win a national title. Florida had a really difficult strength of schedule too, but they went 7-5. Should those 5 losses just not count, and should they be given a spot in the playoff because their schedule was hard, or should they be unranked like they are? That's the thing that I think a lot of people are missing here, or maybe don't fully understand, but the committee valued Alabama's strength of schedule by even having them in the conversation. Strength of schedule is the only reason that 9-3 Alabama was the first team out and considered for an at-large playoff spot, while teams like 9-3 Syracuse, who have 2 ranked wins, Syracuse was ranked 21st. Alabama's strength of schedule is the only reason that they were even in the conversation. Alabama was literally rewarded for their strength of schedule, not punished for it. This concept that a tough strength of schedule has been de-incentivized by Alabama being left out is ridiculous because their tough strength of schedule is the only reason that they were in the conversation. Could you imagine where a 9-3 Miami would be ranked if instead of mounting that comeback against Cal, they lost to them by 21? The Canes might have received the Duke treatment and missed out on the top 25 entirely. The Tide was rewarded greatly for their strength of schedule, probably even more than they should have been in relation to teams like Ole Miss who played a similar strength of schedule and performed better against it. They respected strength of schedule, they honored it, and at the same time they preserved conference championship games because if SMU was left out on Sunday, we literally would have had teams opt out of those games in the future. If SMU was punished for that loss after entering the week number 8, why should they even play it next time around? Let's say in a year from now, SMU is number 8 again, and they go unbeaten in ACC play, they're back in Charlotte. Why wouldn't they go to Commissioner Jim Phillips and just say, yeah, we're not doing that again? Or even if it's Miami or Clemson or Syracuse in that position, why wouldn't they say the same thing? We'd like to just not play that game, we'll give our spot to somebody else and secure our position in the playoff. And why wouldn't the conference grant that? And this isn't just an ACC thing, this could be for any of the other 3. Let's say Indiana got into the Big Ten championship game this year, which really wasn't super far-fetched if Penn State lost to Minnesota or USC. Penn State beat Minnesota by 1 point and beat USC by 3 in overtime. Let's say they lost either of those games, and instead of the Nittany Lions, it was the Hoosiers in the Big Ten championship against Oregon. Why wouldn't Indiana just say, yeah, we don't want to play this? Because they probably would have been out if they lost. And why wouldn't the Big Ten grant that? They absolutely would if it meant getting multiple bids into the playoff, and we can just say, yeah, Ohio State, you can go instead of Indiana and try to battle for that auto bid and get your spot that way. That would absolutely start to become a thing because conferences could basically guarantee themselves another team in the playoff, more money, more TV exposure, all that, by having teams in the field who could fall out by losing a conference championship game just not participate in that game. So where this idea that there wasn't a right answer is coming from, I have no idea. There was an obviously right choice and there was an obviously wrong one, and the committee went with the right one. They were also consistent across the board with how they handled the losers of conference championship games. Number 2 Texas lost to Georgia, they dropped 3 spots to number 5. Number 3 Penn State lost to Oregon, they dropped 3 spots to number 6. And number 8 SMU lost to Clemson, and they dropped 3 spots to number 11. Now, I don't know if that was intentional or just how it happened, but it was consistent nonetheless. And one thing I did have a problem with in that regard was that SMU dropped behind Indiana. SMU went 11-1 and made their conference championship. Indiana went 11-1 and missed their conference championship, but because SMU went to theirs and lost, they fall behind the Hoosiers, who couldn't even get to theirs. I don't necessarily agree with that because Indiana is basically being rewarded and benefiting from Oregon and Penn State being better than them in conference play in terms of seeding. So with that seeding difference, SMU has to travel up to Pennsylvania to face the Nittany Lions, while Indiana stays in their home state and faces Notre Dame. So that's where the implications of that come into play. Outside of that, I really didn't have a problem with the rest of the bracket. A lot of people pointed out that Oregon getting the winner of 8-seed Ohio State and 9-seed Tennessee, while Penn State plays 11-seed SMU and then 3-seed Boise State, was like some sort of major advantage. I'm much higher than most people on SMU, so I'm not under the impression that this is some easy path for Penn State like some people implied. Ohio State lost to 7-5 Michigan at home. Tennessee lost to 6-6 Arkansas. Both of SMU's losses came by 3 points to teams with 10 wins and who are ranked in the top 20. Penn State also has to play an extra game compared to Oregon in their path to a national title, so the Ducks still, of course, have that major advantage, and this notion that losing the Big Ten championship benefited Penn State more than Oregon winning it did is not something I really agree with. And then I've mentioned it in the past episodes a few times, but the only other major problem that I had with the rest of the top 25 rankings on Sunday was, again, that BYU, who is 10-2 and beat the committee's number 10 SMU on the road, is at number 17 behind all those 3-loss SEC teams and 2-loss Miami, completely removed from all conversation about a potential at-large bid. One of BYU's losses was by 5 points to Big 12 champion Arizona State on the road, the same ASU who just destroyed Iowa State by 26 points at a neutral site, and the other was to Kansas. So they're 10-2, they beat number 10 SMU on the road, they narrowly lost to the Big 12 champion by 5 points on the road, and they're somehow nowhere near that final at-large bid. I find that pretty ridiculous. That's going to wrap up this episode of the CFB Kings Show. Really appreciate you making it all the way to the end. The regular season is finished, conference championship week has concluded, the CFP field is set, and bowl game matchups are coming up. So it's been a phenomenal season, tons of exciting bowl games to look forward to, and we still await the first ever edition of the 12-team college football playoff, which should be awesome. I'll be releasing a couple episodes throughout bowl season. We'll take a look at the CFP games, preview some of the bowls and all that, and I look forward to it. Make sure to leave a like if you enjoyed, subscribe to the channel if you're watching on YouTube, follow if you're listening on Spotify, and definitely go check out @CFBKings on Twitter and Instagram for all things college football. Thank you so much for watching. Have a fantastic rest of your day, and take care.